Hello everyone, welcome back to again my YouTube channel. To the front of you again I have come to taking on new topics from the book of 10th class. That book name is here Footprints Without Feet. Which topic about I am to discuss the front of you. That topic name is here a trip of surgery. This is the first lesson of Footprints Without Feet. This is very hilarious and funny way story. The student who will watch this video really they will feel to very entertainment and very interesting. So my all viewer please you must watch of this video. Whole sentences and many sentences will be spoken by me. All the sentence also you go to enter in the mind. After entering of that also you try to contribute of that whole sentences with your class friend, with your teacher. If you do like this activities in your daily life, then I think of that within few days or English will come in your hand, English will come in your mind, and you will feel to very easiest in talking with any one person. And this story I am to define in my own language because I have seen in that book there are so many tough sentences, tough words, heavy sentences, heavy words. That's why you will feel to some difficulty in understanding the right significance of that sentences or that words. So my everyone just be ready to listen carefully of that whole sentences from that story. Now let me come on the point and I am going to define of that whole story sentences. Let you listen carefully. Then here is telling the topic a train pop surgery. What do you understand the means of this? There is the meaning of treatment. In this story there are two persons. First is coming here Mr. Harriet. Mr. Harriet is an animal doctor, means it is called in a special word veterinary, and also he is an author of that story. Other is coming here Mrs. Pamprey. Mrs. Pamprey names who is coming here. She is one rich lady and she keeps one dog. That dog name is here Tricky. He is very small dog and he is coming in the category of greyhound. Tricky and Mrs. Pamprey both are loving to each another very much, means in both there are the bond of love. So always Mrs. Pamprey wishes to feed him so much nutrition things as cream, cake, Horlicks, cod liver, and also eggs. These all the types of the full plate nutrition things are being fed by Mrs. Pamprey of Tricky. Eating of these all the types of the nutrition things, Tricky has been very hugely fat and his whole parts of the body muscles were lolling down the way of earth. And also in this story has depicted here each corner of the Tricky legs, the parts of body muscles were lolling, and also his eyes were looking like a bloodshot, and also his body was appearing like of bumped. One day Mrs. Pamprey and Tricky both are walking in cockcrow in a street, but Tricky is going the back of his mistress, but Tricky is not able to take to big step in going, but he is going to very slowly, means Tricky is trudging, Tricky is hobbling, but he is not taking to big step because his body had been very heaviest, his body was very slow. Due to that he was unable to go with very quickly the back of his mistress. And in the same time Mr. Harriet named person which I have told of you at the beginning of this story, in the same time Mr. Harriet is coming in the same street by his car, and Mr. Harriet when looks the vision of Tricky, just he is startled, whether he is abacked. My God, how am I looking? What am I looking? Like this matter he is thinking after looking the vision of Tricky, because Tricky was very hugely fat, means he was fat too. When he looked at that, just he stopped of his car on the same place, and just he is coming out from his car to opening of his car chamber, and at the stage he came out from his car, just he thought of that actually I should give the advice of this dog mistress. After that Just Mr. Harriet is approaching of Mrs. Pempre, and just Mr. Harriet is telling to Mrs. Pempre, I think our dog is suffering from malnutrition because his eyes is looking like a bloodshot and his whole parts of the body muscles have been bumped. That's why I am thinking here there has been deficiency of nutrition in the body of Tricky. Listening of this matter throughout Mr. Harriet, just Mrs. Pemprey is explaining the front of Mr. Harriet. What are you sensing? What are you talking, sir? I am always coming to feed of my Tricky so much nutrition things as cream, cake, butter, ghee, Horlicks, egg. Even if you are telling, oh, Tricky is suffering from malnutrition, how can be possible that? I can't believe of a matter. After listening of that, again, Mr. Harriet is telling, which you are feeding so much nutrition things that you are doing to wrong. And you are joking. You are joking from the health of Tricky. I know that you are feeding to so much nutrition things. If any person who is taking to so much nutrition food and that nutrition will not be invested from the body of any things, then really that nutrition is changed into malnutrition, and actually again the energy is lost from anyone. Just like that happened here in the body of a Tricky. Tricky body, it had been so much nutrition. After that, I think actually you did not give him lots of the exercise. That's why in the body of Tricky, nutrition has been changed into malnutrition. So I am telling of you cut down this type of the foods. You do not give these cholesterol food. Whether you don't give him greasy food. If you will be giving like this, then really one day you will be involved in a big cases. I am advising you try to give proper exercise of Tricky for making very fit body. If you give lots of the exercise of Tricky, I say sure within 50 days Tricky will be healthy. And if you will not give lots of the exercise, and if like this you will be feeding of Tricky, then really one day you will be involved in a big trouble. That day no any person, whether no any veterinary can save the life of Tricky. Now you have time for improving the health condition of our Tricky. If you are accepting of my advice, then that is good, and if you are not advising, if you are not accepting of my advice, then what can I do? This is your Tricky. This is your animals. There is all right on that animals. What will you do? What will you not do? It is depending on you. I was a veterinary, and being a veterinary, I thought that actually I should advise of these Tricky mistakes. That's why I have advised of you. After listening of these all explanations by Mr. Harriet, just she made fun, and she started to tell the front of Mr. Harriet, if I should cut down this type of the food for Tricky, then really my Tricky will start to suffer malnutrition. Now this time my Tricky is not suffering, but when I shall stop to giving of this type of the nutrition thing, then my Tricky will start to suffer from malnutrition. So I can't do like this anyway in my life. And also Tricky was so much greedy. Whatever things was being given by Mrs. Pempre for Tricky, Tricky also did not refuse to eat of that things. Tricky also was so greedy. And when Mr. Harriet told to Mrs. Pempre, you try to give lots of the exercise, just Mrs. Pempre also told at that moment of Mr. Harriet what to say, who was the gardener of my Tricky, who was giving to exercise. Now he is suffering from lumbago, means now he has pain in the waist. That's why from few days he is not giving to exercise of my Tricky. Now he is taking little run, whether little walk the back of me, and from doing like this, it is done to activities by my Tricky. Telling like this matter, again Mr. Harriet is telling, okay, now I am going. If you will not accept of my advice, then after few days or after some days, you will must call to me for treatmenting or for tricky. That really, I am telling of you, I am not to come to treatment or for tricky. Like this advice again was given by Mr. Harriet to Mrs. Pamprey, and telling of this matter, just Mr. Harriet again is returned on his car and starting to his car, again he is gone to his hospital. After some days, as Mr. Harriet advised to Mrs. Pamprey, like this condition happened in the body of Tricky, or the really Tricky had been fallen seriously ill, and that day Tricky was not eating, not drinking, not looking, not moving. Only Tricky was panting so much to laying on the bed. When like this situation was seen by Mrs. Pamprey, just she started to weep, and just she picked up phone and just called to Mr. Harriet for treatment. After that, when Mr. Harriet picked up Mrs. Pamprey call, then just Mr. Harriet started to say, actually, I know that you are Mrs. Pamprey, but whatever thing you are wanting to tell to me, but I have understood to exactly. You have not need to tell to so much. I think oh, Tricky really has been fallen seriously ill. That's why you have called me. Mrs. Pamprey told to Mr. Harriet, you understood right, sir? You have snatched off my mind opinion, which I was wanting to tell, that already you have told to me, then what to say of you? Let you come my home to treatment for my Tricky. Just Mr. Harriet made some time pretense to telling of this, I am not to come for home for treatmenting or for Tricky, because that day I advised of you to freely, but you did not understand my advice. Then I am not to go. But Mrs. Pamprey started to weep very much the front of Mr. Harriet to telling of this, if my Tricky will be died, then also with my Tricky, I shall be died. So you will have to save the life of my Tricky, then I shall live. And if you will not save my Tricky life, then together Tricky also I shall be died. Thinking of this matter, again Mr. Harriet thought, actually I should not much upset the mind of Mrs. Pamprey. Actually she is very soft-hearted lady, and if she will come in depression, then anything may be done. So thinking of this matter, just Mr. Harriet told, okay, keep on, just I am reaching your home, and just again riding in his car, just Mr. Harriet is reaching on the door of Mrs. Pamprey, and just Mr. Harriet is looking the condition of Tricky to going in his room where Tricky was sleeping. Then really Tricky was not looking, not moving. Also he refused to eating or drinking. Only he was gasping, he was inhaling or exhaling very long and long. Looking of this condition, just Mr. Harriet is telling to Mrs. Pamprey, I am looking here, actually or Tricky has fallen very seriously ill, but for treatmenting of for Tricky, you will have to get admit in my hospital for fortnight. If you will get admit of for Tricky in my hospital reaching, then it can be possible to save the life of Tricky. And if you are not wanting to admit of Tricky in my hospital, then actually no any veterinary can save the life of Tricky, because your Tricky has been fallen seriously ill. If you are wanting to see to better wholesome other health condition, then for fortnight you will have to get admit in my hospital very soon. Without lapsing time, you will have to reach in my hospital. As the states, Mrs. Pamprey heard of this type of the meters through up Mr. Harriet, just she is fitted on for some while. After that, again when she comes in sense, just Mr. Harriet is telling, I have not lost of the times. Ma'am, you tell to me what are you to do. But also Mrs. Pamprey started to think, coming in senseful mind, if I shall keep to longer time in my home of Tricky, then really Tricky will be died, then I shall see the dead body of my Tricky. So why not I should get admit of my Tricky in the hospital of Mr. Harriet, and thinking like this, some uh, intellect meter, just Mrs. Pempry is telling after some time, okay, if my Tricky will be safe to reaching in your hospital, then you can take away and you can admit of my Tricky. Just Mrs. Pempry is ordering to every staff, every servant, as many servants who are working in the home of Mrs. Pempry, just she is ordering to packing of all those usable things, as many usable things have there for Tricky, all those things started to pack by her staff, and all those things started to be loaded in Mr. Harriet car. And when all those things were loaded in the car of Mr. Harriet, then one servant came to taking the Tricky body, and Tricky is kept in the seat of Mr. Harriet car. And again Mr. Harriet is telling, okay Mrs. Okay ma'am, now I am to go, I will not delay here. If I say late, then really Tricky will be died here without treatment. So Tricky has need now very best treatments. After again Mr. Harriet is ridden on his car, and starting of his car he is reaching on the main road. As a stage Mr. Harriet is reaching on the main road. By the side mirror of his car, just Mr. Harriet is looking. In other way, Mrs. Pempry is crying to so much, oh my heart, where are you going? Oh my dear, where are you going? Like this telling, just Mrs. Pempry cried when Mr. Harriet car reached on the main road. When Mr. Harriet was going on the road, at that moment Mr. Harriet was going to look the condition of Tricky, and Mr. Harriet is judging insidely of the heart. Actually you have eaten to so much nutrition things throughout or mistakes, and you have been very hugely fat, and you have been seriously ill. I shall treatment of you very well to reaching in my hospital. Like this matter he was going to think about looking the condition of Tricky, and very soon he is reaching again in his hospital main gate. As a stage Mr. Harriet is reaching on his hospital main gate, just all those nurses also were standing there. Just Mr. Harriet is ordering to any of the nurse, let to bring one carpet, I shall have to keep up Tricky just a corner of this my main gate, just beside of the hospital main gate. I shall have to keep up the Tricky. I shall not have to keep up the Tricky inside the room of my hospital, because Tricky has enjoyed to very much to living in his richest mistress. So for few days actually also Tricky has need to take some painful life. If he will bear of that painful life, then really he will have lots of the bearance power in his body. Now his body is very soft. That's why he is suffering from taking to so different type of the disease. Like this matter, Mr. Harriet told to any of the nurse, and any of the nurse went to running inside of the hospital and just brought one carpet. After bringing of that, just that carpet was spread just beside of the hospital main gate, and on that carpet Tricky body was kept. After keeping of that Tricky body, just Mr. Harriet started to think of that, how to treatment of Tricky body now in my hospital. Like this matter Mr. Harriet is thinking, actually who can treatment to very better of one dog. Actually one dog can treatment to very better of one dog, because animal can treatment of animal. I am animal doctor, but I can think of any way for treatmenting of Tricky. But who can treatment? I can treatment to best of Tricky. Whether dogs can treatment of dog. Just thinking of that matter, just he searched one idea in his mind, and just he called, just he collected some rascal dog who was living around of his hospital, which rascal dog kept on wandering here and there in each hour, in each moment. Those all loafer dogs, whether all those rascal dogs were being collected by Mr. Harriet beside of Tricky body where Tricky was laid. Just many rascal dogs were collected there. After collecting of that, just Mr. Harriet started to think of that how to keep up this all rascal dog around of Tricky body. Just again one idea came in the mind of Mr. Harriet. If I shall give the food one time to time of these all rascal dog, then these all rascal dog will not go to anywhere living of Tricky. And he started to do similarly thinking as he was thinking. He collected and he started to give foods one time to time of the all rascal dog. All those rascal dogs sometimes were smelling the body of Tricky, and when all those rascal dogs were barking at night time, also Tricky was wanting to bark, but he had not lots of the energy in the body of Tricky. Then how Tricky will bark, listening of another dog barking. So at that moment he was whining, he was whimpering, he was weeping. Just like this condition was happening to Tricky, and also Mr. Harriet is looking the health condition of Tricky. One day Mr. Harriet did not give up many things of Tricky for eating or drinking. When it became to next day that Mr. Harriet is giving one bowl of water and he is keeping some distance from the body of Tricky. As Tricky could see, as Tricky could reach to creeping the near of that bowl of water. And when it became next day, directly the sun ray was falling in the body of Tricky, and from the body of Tricky the sweat was coming out. And when the sweat started to come from the body of Tricky, then his whole greasy from the body of Tricky started to melt. Like this condition happened 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. He lived in fast mode. When his whole parts of the body greasy melted, then just Mr. Harriet again thought of that, actually I should give some food for Tricky. And one time to time Mr. Harriet started to keep extra bowl of food just the near of Tricky, as Tricky could see. And when also Tricky looked to another dogs skirmishing, running the back of that food for eating, just like that also Tricky was wanting to follow up another dogs, as another dogs were running the back of eating of their share of food. Just like that also he was wanting to run, but he was not able to run too very quickly, even if he was craving and he was going. But unless till when Tricky went the near of that rascal dog for eating, till then that all rascal dog ate up of that all parts of the food, and only he was licking some parts of the food which was left by that rascal dog. And now he is only licking some parts of the food, and also he is licking some water and all. After it, what happened there? Day by day the condition of Tricky started to improve, and when the condition started to improve, and exactly when he started to run the back of all those rascal dogs in daily life, then also Mr. Harriet thought of that, actually this is the deed of my mind of art. And after 10 days when he became to fully fit, when he started to run the back of all those rascal dogs like of any runner, as any rascal dogs were running the back of any things, as any rascal dogs were wanting to make to victim of any hands, just like that also Tricky was running the back of that rascal dog like to making of penny victim of any hands, whether any types of the hunting. When it became 10 days, then one day Mrs. Pempry is calling to Mr. Harriet. Hello sir, how is the condition of my tricky? Now the health condition of my tricky is improving or not? Just Mr. Harriet is telling to Mrs. Pempry, actually our tricky has been exactly fit. Now he has not of any problem in the body of tricky. Now he has lack something, and what is that? That is nutrition. Means when Mrs. Pempry asked to Mr. Harriet what is lack in the body of tricky, just now Mr. Harriet is telling there is some dearth in the body of tricky, that is nutrition. As a stage Mrs. Pempry heard of that matter, there is like some nutrition. Then from the next day Mrs. Pempry started to send eggs, brandy, these all the types of the nutrition things are started to send in the hospital of Mr. Harriet for feeding of tricky. But as many things were being sent by Mrs. Pempry, all those things were being used by Mr. Harriet nurses and Mr. Harriet staff. As many staff were working in the hospital of Mr. Harriet, all those persons were using of all those things, which thing was sent by Mrs. Pempry for tricky, but no any parts of them was being given of tricky for eating by Mr. Harriet, whether by Mr. Harriet's staffs. Like this, every day Mr. Harriet and his whole staffs, they all were enjoying to eating of that nutrition things, and like this every day was passing. And also till then Tricky also had been one member of that old rascal dog. As the rascal dogs were running around of that hospital, just like that also Tricky started to run the back of that old rascal dog, and he became to very smart, very active. Within few days, one day again when 15 days happened, then Mrs. Pempry is reaching in the main gate of Mr. Harriet, and as a stage Mrs. Pempry is reaching in the main gate of Mr. Harriet. Just Mr. Harriet is looking, now madam has reached in my main gate for taking off his tricky. And just Mr. Harriet is coming the front of Mrs. Pempry, and just Mrs. Pempry is telling to Mr. Harriet, where is my lovely tricky, where is my heart? Just Mr. Harriet is telling, oh, tricky has been absolutely fit. Now he is wandering the front of my hospital garden. Now you stay here, I am going to bring off for tricky. After that, just he is going in his hospital garden, and just he is calling off her tricky. And now Mr. Harriet is coming to taking off tricky in his hug, and at the stage Mr. Harriet is standing the front of Mrs. Pempry to taking off tricky. Just tricky is looking off his mistress. Just he is jumped up from the hug of Mr. Harriet and reaching in the hug of Mrs. Pempry. And at the stage tricky is gone in the hug of Mrs. Pempry. Just tricky started to lick whole parts of the face of Mrs. Pempry with lovely. And now also Mrs. Pempry is looking the condition of the tricky. Actually tricky had been very slim body. Actually now this time tricky was not hugely fat. Now he was in medium shape body. After looking the very fit condition of tricky, now Mrs. Pempry is telling to Mr. Harriet how to say a few thank. Actually this is our triumph of surgery. Means you have one old treatments. You have very extraordinary art for treatmenting of any animals. This story is ending here. After riding in his car, Mrs. Pempry and dogs Tricky again both are gone away to her home. And now this story is ending. I am telling you all students How did you feel after listening of these whole parts of the story? I am telling you all, if you have heard to very carefully and if you have understood the whole parts of the story, I will tell you, please you must share this whole story with each and other friends. And also, if you are wanting to take the class of the English to English, then you can join to me. I will help of you for making to very expert, whether for making of experience in reciting of any kinds of the story. As I am explaining of any story, in the same way also you can explain of any kinds of the story. I am going to discuss something about a more question answer about of this chapter. There is coming the first question. Why was Mrs. Pemprey alright about of Tricky? Why was Mrs. Pemprey right about Tricky? I think all of the students may have understood. Mrs. Pemprey was right about the Tricky because Tricky was suffering from malnutrition. He had been hugely fed to eating of overdose. Will be done. The next question is coming here. What does she do help him? Is she watching this? What does she do help him? Is she watching this? Means what things giving? Tricky was helping of what giving? Mrs. Pemprey was helping of Tricky for a build up. Mrs. Pemprey was giving so different type of the nutrition things for making build of Tricky body as cod liver, cake, cream. These various type of the things were being given by Mrs. Pemprey for Tricky for making build up. Next question is coming here. Who does I refer in this story? Who is telling of you that story? This story has not been defined by me. This story has been told by Mr. Harriet. He is the author of this story. Then who is coming I in this story? Mr. Harriet is I in this story. In the second comprehension, there are 4 questions. First question is coming here. Is the narrator as rich as Tricky mistress? What will you understand, all of you? Each narrator means each Mr. Harriet as rich as Tricky mistress. What will you understand? Mr. Harriet is not as rich as Tricky mistress. Second question, how does he treat the dog? He treats the dogs without giving of injection or medicine. He treats the dogs through the art of his mind. Will be done. Third question, why does he want to keep Tricky as a permanent guest in his hospital? Mr. Harriet is wanting to keep Tricky as a permanent guest in his hospital for getting lots of the benefit, because throughout Tricky, all those staff and self Mr. Harriet, they all were getting lots of benefit throughout Tricky mistress. That's why he was wanting to keep Tricky in his hospital like of any permanent. In the fourth question, there is telling how to say thank. Actually, why does Mrs. Pemprey say of Mr. Harriet how to say you thank? Actually, she is wanting to thank of Mr. Harriet. This is your theme of surgery. Means you have treatmented of my Tricky with very wellness. Like this, he tells something here, and I am telling you this story. I am ending here. Till then, I am telling you, you watch that video. Again, I shall visit in my next video. For till then, bye bye. Thank you.